right. Well, thanks, Michael, for agreeing to seeing us and meeting us. And we're just going to ask you some questions about, well, your career and you as a history eminence, which is basically what you are, in case you weren't aware of this. Right, so could you start telling us about your education as a historian, like where you studied, what you did, and why?
I've always been interested in history, school, etc. I was rather good at it, which was nice. Of course, if you're rather good at things, you want to continue them. Secondary school, I actually did modern languages.
Oh.
It was that or geography. And, I sort of came back to history at that point. And then, obviously, I did it as an undergraduate, and I proved to be rather good at it. And so I continued beyond that. And I was one of the very few, very lucky people in my generation who managed then to get an academic job at the end of it, to relatively, well, not a relatively early age, but by modern standards, a relatively early age. And I've been here for a long time.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good.
Why did you choose to specialise in your topic?
It was the university I went to, Bristol, had made everybody do medieval history in the first year, which was a jolly good thing to do. Yeah. And so I continued doing medieval history after that, and I did a special subject on the Wars of the Roses, which I liked very much, and therefore that was the sort of area which I then developed into. And I developed in lots of other ways as well, into English local history and so on, etc. But nevertheless, what I did at university, and I suspect that's the same with everybody else, determined broadly the area in which I continued further work.
Do you think you would have chosen something else if you would have studied somewhere else?
At one point I thought I was going to do late medieval French history.
Oh, really? I would have not suspected that.
And I actually had a supervisor at Oxford who was a late medieval French historian. And yes, it might have made a difference at the university if I'd got on my first choice special subject, which was Richelieu, but in fact I didn't succeed in getting on that. So yes, of course it's possible, and people end up in areas which they haven't necessarily chosen, but which they've found themselves in and find congenial.
Yeah, there you go. You want to.
What do you consider some of the highlights of your career?
Gosh.
Tricky question.
Well, I suppose there are a series of degrees, aren't there? Obviously the publication of various books, particularly some of the big ones.
Which one are you most proud of? Which one of your books? I know it's difficult to choose, but...
Well, I suppose the White the Kingmaker and the Wars of the Roses are the two big books, aren't they? So one ought to be particularly pleased with those. Becoming course director of the BA Honours History with associated subjects here, that was a plus. That was an extremely competitive post. And I suppose becoming head of history. Yep, those must be highlights, mustn't they?
Good. Your career in Winchester is exciting, isn't it? So I suppose that ties in with the next question. We've already said you're a big eminence in the field, and are there pressures associated with being such a prominent figure and such an active historian, and does that ever influence your work?
Well, people ask you to do a lot of things, and it's not altogether. Perhaps one should say no more often, but if you're doing sort of about 12 visiting lecturers of various types a year, you've got rid of one, and there's another one cropping up fairly soon, and deadlines and things like that. Yes, there's a lot of pressure like that. Obviously, you want your work to be good. And there are different reasons why you write and why you do things, and this is a good area to work on, public dissemination. Here one's supporting a colleague or something else. Here's something that is your primary interest. Here's something for the ref, and keeping all those in balance can be quite a strain. But I think that's true of everybody, probably. And I haven't had loads and loads of people sort of trying to shoot me down in flames, which lots of so-called eminences have suffered from. I suspect that's because I'm not quite as eminent as you seem to be indicating.
Well, in your field, you are.
Okay,
you
fine.
are. But no, I think it's one of those things we don't appreciate from this side of the academic spectrum. Like, it's not only about teaching, but you have to do so many other things. It's about juggling everything together.
And of course, you've been an MA student, so you know, which the undergraduates generally don't know, that we're doing the MA in the evening as well.
Exactly.
And now you're a research student, and you know we also do research students.
Exactly. It's just a big.
Though you haven't caused us a lot of trouble yet by handing in 20,000 words to be read by Monday or anything, this will come.
I'll attempt my best not to do that. Right.
Okay. What are your views on the current teaching of history at universities?
Well, the general impression seems to be that the teaching of history in schools and at universities is very good. I mean, all the surveys seem to indicate that history is one of the subjects that is best taught. I mean, it tends to be old-fashioned teaching, lectures, seminars and things like that. Special subjects and depth studies, gobbets, skills, etc. But I think virtually any historian you wish to talk to would say that actually this is what history courses should be about and should involve. And this is what the history benchmarks say. So I think there's a very, very close relationship in the teaching of history, the actual teaching of history, with what the rules set out in the benchmark say historians ought to be doing. And yet within that there's quite a variety of styles, as you'll know. You'll know people who are much more interactive. You've got a remarkable range of types of history. Now that history consists of everything in the past is history, and there are a whole different range of ways in which you can study it. You can have an extraordinary variety, as you do in this department, of teaching and approaches to history from people who basically share the same historical principles.
Do you think if the benchmarks weren't there, you would like to do things differently? Or are you happy with how the rules are set?
Well, obviously times change, but when the benchmarks came out, we greeted them with enormous enthusiasm because they seemed to be telling us to do exactly what we were already doing.
That's handy.
So that was very handy. I think there are constraints. I mean, we teach, as you know, generic modules, things like civilization studies and comparative studies and theme studies, just as students in many cases would like to do a chunk of history without a set of learning outcomes or a particular shape to it. So, of course, would staff. But I think it's good that we have to operate within certain disciplines, and that we have to think carefully what we're doing, and that isn't simply taking a great mass of data or a particular point of view and shoving it down students' throats.
That is handy for us, isn't it? Right, so we know you're retiring soon, and we're very upset about this. But we know you have many projects going apart from your PhD students, so could you tell us a bit more about this, particularly the Inquisitio postmortem and that sort of things?
Well, obviously we hope to yes, I've got basically what I intend to retire from is the administration and the day-to-day teaching and the marking. There comes a point in life where the marking is very burdensome anyway, but there comes a point in life when the marking becomes really very difficult, and it makes one go to sleep and things like that. And but yes, I've got lots of projects. My problem is going to be, however, that it's possible to fit them all in.
Yeah.
And Barbara York said she was very glad to retire when she did, because she'd accepted so many commitments that she wasn't sure she could meet it. Yes, the Inquisition's post-mortem, obviously one of them. This is this big national project which is involved in completing the editing of a major source for the late medieval countryside, for the nobility and also the economy and society, but also disseminating it as widely as possible, because it's not really been very accessible in large volumes with indexes. And yes, I'm hoping we will get a renewal of the money for that, to carry on with the work, and we've got a sort of staged approach we want to pursue. And of course I've got a successor in James Ross here. He's been appointed here, but I think probably he won't take over to start with. We'll have a period when we work in harness, and then he can take over. So that's certainly something. I've got any number of other things that I'm working on, and I shall have to start, and lots of things that are half finished. You've got sort of lots and lots of things that are half finished, and you really need to work through those. I've got a popular book. Well, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 papers.
Wow.
A large chapter. And a short popular book to write by December next year.
Whoa, that's a lot of work, Michael. And 2 books to edit too. So yes, I've got a fair amount to do. Yeah.
And if I survive that, then I shall be able to start looking at what I'm going to do. I mean, it would be lovely to go to an archive again. I very, very seldom go to archives, or indeed any of the great libraries where there's lots of material for at the moment and for quite a long time. When I've gone to these places, I've gone very much on a keyhole basis. I've identified exactly what I want, and I'm going there for an hour because I've got a meeting immediately afterwards somewhere else. And it would be very, very nice to be able to get back to rather more of that type of thing. Perhaps it will be possible, but yes, I've got several sort of draft books up there of various types. Which ones I select for? Well, as I say, I need to get rid of all these things I've got already first.
Oh God, that's a lot of work. Right. Now we have some tricky questions for you. We would like to ask you, I know you've talked about this before in different places, but we would like to ask you your thoughts and feelings on the discovery of Richard III, and how did that affect you, if in any way, and about it, and how the procedures went. Do you think historians and archaeologists should work closely when they are dealing with these sort of massive discoveries, or do you think things were handled in the right way? I know it's a difficult question, it's fine.
Well, it is a difficult question, isn't it? I mean, obvious, from a historical point of view, it would be nice if archaeologists could add to the fund of evidence we have available. But archaeology doesn't seem to provide us with conclusive answers, and it also needs to be interpreted. I mean, it is not clear, I think, that it's Richard III, and proving it's Richard III is going to be extremely difficult. Now, let's assume it is Richard III. Does it actually tell us anything? I mean, we know Richard III died violently in battle on a particular day and was buried in Leicester. So finding a set of bones in Leicester of approximately the right date, which might be Richard III, and which demonstrate the person died violently in battle, doesn't actually carry us very far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if it tells us, if we can be sufficiently certain about it, I mean, it doesn't help us terribly to know he ate a lot of fish either. All right, well, if we go beyond that, if it tells us that he actually suffers a curvature of the spine, that is of interest because it tends to show that the Tudor myth was correct. But as you know, that's already controversial, with lots of people saying, oh, you wouldn't have known he had a curvature of the spine until he was naked. Well, all right, but would it have affected him? I mean, from the point of view of him being in some way disabled, then his military career, his courage is the more remarkable. But it's really an absolutely tiny facet of the man. And it doesn't really tell us about his popularity or his wickedness or anything else like that. Exactly the same thing with the Battle of Bosworth, where I've got a big book on the top of the table somewhere over there about the, archaeological excavations at Bosworth, which appear to suggest where the battle took place, and appear to show a certain number of cannons were fired, which is what one would expect, but they don't seem to carry one any further towards questions like which was the larger army, why the battle was won, even who fired the cannons. So, that was it's a big project, but it's an immensely expensive project. But since we already know this battle took place on the 22nd of August 1485, Richard III was killed, Henry VII won, has it really carried us very much further? I'm not sure it has. I mean, archaeologists and historians have different agendas. Historians, yes, there are historians who are terribly interested in what actually went on blow by blow in the battle. But most historians want to take the information and use it to answer larger questions, whereas archaeologists tend to be far more focused on the site. What can we learn about the site? And that in a sense takes you away from the big questions. Yeah. So there is a difference there. Having said that, using all these forensic things, one can imagine that there are questions that can be more easily answered. Let us say you did examine the bones of the princes and the princes at Westminster Abbey. It might be very easy to discount that these are the bones of the princes, or the suggestion that a set of bones of Perkin Warbeck are in fact royal. Well, again, we now have the expertise with the DNA test to say this is quite conceivable, or there is no evidence for this whatsoever. So there are certain issues, but they tend to be the ones that aren't enormously helpful, in that we know Perkin Warbeck, what happened to him. Similarly, we're pretty confident about what happened to the princes in the Tower, even if we haven't actually got the right bones. So that's another thing. I think possibly archaeology is better at processes than events.
Okay.
Fair enough. Then we have the next controversial question. It's about your opinion on late TV historical dramas and productions based on the Middle Ages, such as The White Queen. I think we all know everyone's opinion on The White Queen. But what do you think these TV shows are contributing to history and public history, or if anything? you think they're making more mess than they are fixing, or do you think perhaps they are contributing to that fascination?
I think that's the danger, isn't it? I mean, obviously, the White Queen is immensely popular. You know, large numbers of people watched it. Philippa Gregory's novels are enormously popular. There is an opportunity there for the late Middle Ages to be popularised and for people to have a much better understanding of it. The danger is the drastic manipulation of what is known and transfiguration of what is known for popular drama, essentially. And I mean, we're all aware about Shakespeare's role in forming people's views of the past, and there's been a lot of criticism of Shakespeare for doing that. But Shakespeare, after all, was depicting a period which was very similar to himself, so he didn't really move outside it. The danger, I would have thought, is the White Queen replaces Shakespeare in people's estimation, and we get a sense that medieval people were just like us, that kings could wander around incognito, like the prince in Cinderella or something, that they all married for love, that and so on and so forth. And lots of historical figures are seriously distorted. I mean, I was down as a researcher for the real White Queen, but I have to say I could see no sign that any part of my advice had been taken. And Tony Pollard said exactly the same when I saw him quite recently. So, I mean, one has... The late Middle Ages is really quite popular. Much of the work for that is due to the Richard III Society. And although one often differs on points of detail, one has to acknowledge that their contribution to public understanding and popularity, and therefore to the resources available from this field, is considerable. The problem is clearly if it results in an understanding of the past that has very little relationship to reality. I mean, obviously there are lots of minor anachronisms like the zip fastener and things like that. But you know, after all, we are living today. What part of the world has not changed at all in the last 500 years? So, I mean, I was very disappointed. I did manage to sit through it all. It's
a good effort, not all of us managed to.
But yes, I found it rather painful when Margaret Beaufort in Lincoln rushed down to Pembroke to be with her son and to be with Jasper Tudor. I was a bit puzzled, since both of them were Woking at the time.
Historical anachronisms, I suppose. One of those things. It's always difficult. I mean, I can see, like you said, there is advantages because it gets more people interested, and that's I think that's good in general. You know, people to have at least a vague knowledge of what were they. But obviously, there are complications.
Well, Edward IV, you see, is hardly mentioned in Shakespeare's plays, and people don't come away with any impression of Edward IV. No. Edward IV is, after all, the most successful king of the Wars of the Roses. And they come away with Richard III, and they come away with Henry VI, and they come away with Henry VII, but they don't come away with Edward IV. Well, now, here is Edward IV, full centre stage, etc., and lots of stuff on Edward IV, except it doesn't have very much resemblance to the real Edward IV.
Well, at least I suppose it's making some noise. And
we'll have to see, won't we? Yeah. Whether this is a series that has repeats, for example. I mean, I haven't seen the statistics for the viewings, but how far, shall we say, what happened to the viewings from programme 1 to 10? Yeah. Did they start off and grow, or did they start off and diminish. And, had they by the time of, Programme 10 reached the point where if you were going to launch a White Queen Part 2, you'd say it's not economic.
We'll have to wait and see. Maybe we'll ask you next time if we can get hold of you in your massive library or in our archive. Right, and I think we have the last question. Basically, if you had a time machine, because every historian would like to have a time machine, right? What period or what thing in particular would you like to look at or experience? Considering you cannot interact or manipulate it, just as a spectator of the events, what particular thing you reckon you would like to be present for? And record it and write an amazing book. Another amazing book to add to the list.
Gosh.
It is tricky.
I've got to write an amazing book. It's got to be quite a big thing, hasn't it?
I'm sure you can do whatever you want wherever you go.
Yes, I think I'd like to witness Edward IV's first audience with Catherine, with Elizabeth Woodville. I think that might enable us to answer quite a lot of questions. I don't particularly want to be there at the murder of the princes in the Tower.
It may get a bit bloody.
I don't think I necessarily want to be there to see whether Clarence was drowned in about a month.
A bit grim.
And I think, being on the field of Bosworth perhaps is a little bit on the dangerous side.
Yeah.
No, I mean, usually those time machine questions are a bit bigger, aren't they?
Yeah.
And you go back to the past, and gosh, yes, I would be a nobleman wearing lots of grand gear. Unfortunately, it wouldn't have been washed for a few years.
Yes, so yeah.
And as Professor Paul Harvey once remarked, imagine going back 5 centuries. What did you do about toothache?
Oh God, yeah. That wouldn't be particularly pleasant. Well, there you go. Edward IV and his audience.
Well, Elizabeth Woodville's audience. With
the other way around, I suppose.
Yes, you see. I strongly suspect that they went straight to bed. But
you never know. Right, well,
Okay.
I think that's everything, unless you have any questions.
No, that's it.
No? That's it
Thank
then.
you very much.